Hello and welcome to the first Automotive Logistics live stream of this year, Building the Automotive Supply Chain of 2026. I'm Megan Kelly. I'm the Deputy Editor at Automotive Logistics, and I'm going to be leading us through a discussion today where we're talking about embracing opportunity in dynamic and volatile markets. We're going to speak about some kind of practical and timely things about resilience and how to navigate 2026. And also we will have a Q&A during the live stream, so please do send us in any questions you have into the chat. To quickly run through today's show and kind of set the scene a bit with some of our key editorial themes that we'll be speaking about. I've got Christopher Ludwig, the Chief Content Officer of Automotive Logistics and Ultima Media, here in the studio with me. And we're going to speak a bit about some of the tariffs and trade volatility that's happening at the minute and how people are dealing with that through scenario planning. Then if we just look at the agenda again, we'll bring in Marian Gillick, who is the Head of Supply Chain Resilience Management at Daimler Truck. And Marian will be talking about building resilience into real-world decision-making and what that looks like. We'll have a quick conversation, the three of us, in a roundtable sort of format where you can answer, or where Marian and Chris can answer your questions. And then finally, to round it off, we'll speak about the USMCA and some of the compliance issues that are set to come up this year. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that over the past couple of years, we've really been providing lots of coverage on risk and how to kind of be resilient in the face of that. And there's been more and more uncertainty, and it keeps ramping up. We used to have black swan events every few years, and now it seems like there are multiple of them per year. Some of the things that are affecting the industry at the minute, obviously lots of tariffs and trade negotiations. There are suppliers who might be facing distress this year, especially in Europe. We've seen the likes of Bosch warning about its profits this year. We've also seen logistics providers kind of struggling in a more fragmented market. The likes of Standard, Forward and Freight, who have had to pause operations recently, is a big one that's going to affect a lot of people in the supply chain. And then we have raw material dependencies that are shifting due in part due to these trade negotiations, shifting EV policies, natural disasters. We've had this snowstorm in the US that's really, making it more challenging for the supply chain. And then, of course, compliance and regulation issues as well. So if you want to take a look at some of the most recent coverage on our website, you can scan the QR codes there. Chris, welcome. It's great to be able to speak to you a bit about this.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So yeah, I was hoping that you could maybe give us a bit of an overview of some of these risks. I know at ALSC Global in Detroit at the end of last year, you said to the delegates there that there's really no going back to the industry that we once knew. And that was only 4 months ago, and now the risks are even bigger. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges facing the industry at the minute?
Yeah, it's all gotten very simple since then, hasn't it? The world has sort of settled right down. I think you hit on many of them, obviously, certainly at the sort of geopolitical macro level. And I think if we think about risks right now in the automotive supply chain in 2026, we certainly have to break them down into a market level, and certainly then at the operational sort of logistical level, which might be hitting people sort of day by day. Now, some of these are things that our audience and experts in the supply chain just have to deal with. It's year on year. So weather, extreme weather, although that's certainly seems to be getting more extreme. It could be a supplier fire, all those kind of stuff. But I think to your point, we're seeing disruption come at faster pace, and combined with these other uncertainties is what's really changing it. So maybe just to pick on a few of them. So you mentioned the tariffs, and of course that's just not going away. And I think the development now is probably less that there are tariffs, because at this time last year it was the will he, won't he, on again, off again sort of announcements just after the inauguration in the US. Now post Liberation Day and number of trade deals, to a certain extent we know the tariffs, but just when we think we know them, maybe we don't know them.
Yeah.
Point in case, South Korea announcement, the fallout from the Greenland debacle or debate, which then was pushed off, but not even just out of the U.S. I mean, we obviously see a trend elsewhere. Mexico has brought in higher tariffs for non-free trade countries. The chance of various retaliation seems strong when we get into the trade war territory. And clearly that was part of the fallout with China last year. China has an absolute ability to turn the screw if it needs to on critical minerals and certain supplies. So those sorts of aspects are what is so hard to predict because they're vulnerabilities. I think then, and I'm sure we'll get into some of this together with Marian, but how do we then navigate other black swan or other major disruptions that may come? There is the risk, more than a risk of other wars breaking out. Iran perhaps being the most obvious, that may occur just maybe in the coming days, maybe not, with the fleet sort of building up. That would, at a minimum, certainly put on hold plans to reopen the Red Sea, would have an impact on energy prices, and of course, major horrific disruption elsewhere, both on a humanitarian and potentially economic side. That could happen. There could be further outbreak of the Ukraine war with Russia aggression in other parts of NATO. There could be a China incursion into Taiwan. It could be this year, it could be next year, it could not come. But these are the sort of scenarios that the supply chain has to really think about. Yeah. Not just in a war game sense. These are real possibilities. So that, and I think we'll talk about it later, like what happens with the USMCA. To a certain extent, it feels null and void, right? But it comes up now for negotiation. It's a big uncertainty around that. At the kind of financial market level, significant changes. We've now seen the EV shift in the US because the policy changes has come so swiftly. So combined with perhaps slower than expected demand, there's now the lack of incentives, and this is shifting away from EVs. We saw the write-downs from certain OEMs. The EU is adjusting its targets, although still keeping pretty aggressive ones. And this all has, whilst China powers ahead, but this all has an impact on the overall market stability, the product planning, and ultimately how the supply chain is oriented. And in the shift and changes come, as you raised earlier, potential for financial distress at suppliers, drops in profit at certain manufacturers could lead to other cuts elsewhere. We're starting to see that. So this needs to be understood. How robust is your supply chain? How robust, right down to your logistics provider? How robust is the health of these players? And then finally, as alluded to, the operational disruptions, which we do see frequently. We saw last year with the fires at the aluminum suppliers in the US. That had such a big impact across many parts of the supply chain, at least from a cost side, moving many things around. And obviously the interconnectedness of the supply chain has not gone away, but the vulnerabilities have become more exposed, and those risks are only escalating. So, it's a complicated soup. You add into that the risk of cyber attacks, you add into that the other regulations and compliance changes, and higher costs that are coming in the EU. We have a carbon pricing, which is coming into other parts of the supply chain now and impacting certain material purchases, impacting shipping at a point. So all of these risks and changes are things that have to be seriously looked at across logistics and supply chain departments in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah. And obviously you speak to a lot of the leaders in logistics and supply chain. How are you seeing some of the effective strategies for resilience really take hold this year? Like, how are these leaders predicting and taking on these risks?
Yeah, I think I'll try not to go into too much detail, because I think we can maybe also unpack some of that with Marian from Daimler Truck, which would be very interesting. But I see it certainly in a few different ways, kind of at a high level. One is absolutely the visibility in the supply chain and visibility in monitoring. So developing a kind of control tower, command center view of your operations, which is not new. People talk about control towers for decades, but definitely it's being enhanced by digital tools, by better data strategy and integration, and of course then layering in a certain amount of machine learning, AI that can help to pick these things up. So I almost don't know now of a manufacturer that doesn't have a serious project to better integrate this data. But there are some who have been working on it for longer and are further along, and I think are able to point to some real obvious benefits of doing that. So that's definitely one important area. The other area, if we look at the sort of supply chain design, network design, both from a logistics and a kind of procurement supply chain point of view. Now, with trade walls coming up, tariffs, with these risks, there is a fragmenting of the supply chain back towards a certain amount of regionalization and, where possible, localization. We should never overplay that, because it just isn't something that happens so fast or can happen so fast. But where it's feasible and possible, it absolutely is happening, and I think we're definitely seeing more of that to as a resilience factor. But the interesting parallel to that is resilience is also about options, having multiple options where it makes sense. So having a backup supplier in case of a disruption, and that might go against localization. So when the fires for aluminium happened in the US last year in North America, there was definitely a lot of extra aluminium being flown in from other regions, despite there being 50% tariffs. But and at that point, the trade-off was keep the resiliency, keep production going, pay that extra price. So, and in logistics, having maybe multiple ports of entry might be another resiliency option. In Mexico, we spoke to some who, for example, in the same port, had different performance results in two different terminals from the customs side. So even just having, backup options, sometimes it comes down to something at that sort of level. Yeah. So I think those are a few of the areas that I would point to as obvious strategies for resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll speak a bit more about this a bit later in the live stream too. But just touching on that point that you made about different strategies for resilience and staying a bit more flexible, how do you see the industry getting better at being more proactive? It's hard to balance, having to face each crisis on a day-to-day basis, let alone think ahead. Yeah. So how do you think the industry can get better at that?
Yeah, and then again, I think there's a kind of a technological approach and then maybe a more personal, direct approach. One is certainly building on what I said earlier, these sort of control center, command centers, is having a data strategy and a visibility strategy that both actively monitors a certain amount of passive risk across the supply chain, and then can pinpoint where real issues might arise through direct connections. So it might be, your logistics is connected to your TMS, connects to your ERP, and you have a real-time visibility of trucking movements, and your inventory levels, right? So this is a basic level, fairly basic level, but an important level that more companies would try to reach, to have that visibility and be able to see a problem before it really hits the plant. But then getting into more predictive modeling, where thanks to having data layers and sort of machine learning layers, you can see, based on the data that's coming in, where a potential might arise and take a preventative action against that. But I think this comes down not just to the tools. There are incredible advancing tools, but if you don't have, the right connectivity, the right data standards, and importantly, if you don't have the teams trained, able to use it, interact with them, and then don't have the supplier partnerships, with the trust to share that information and help one another, you need that, I think, to really then move into proactive and then ultimately into more predictives. And that also then means, sometimes it's picking up the phone, of course, as well. Talking to one OEM who, after a disruption, really saw the personal value of certain relationships with providers who went the extra mile to help them. Be it in waiting for shipment times or understanding payment terms, whatever it might be. This direct relationship shouldn't be underestimated on top of all of the technological areas. So maybe those are just a few areas that I would highlight.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that from that OEM perspective too. Thank you so much, Chris, and we'll hear more from you in a little bit. We're going to bring on Marion in just a moment, but first I just wanted to highlight some of the other ways you can keep up with our content. You can see if you scan any of these QR codes or click the links in the chat, that you can keep up to date on our website. We've got some of the latest news and features, interviews to do with some of these challenges that the industry is facing at the minute. For example, the change in trade relations between the US and Canada at the minute. It's changing on a very, very fast turnaround. So it's great to keep up to date with that on our website. You can also check out our content calendar for the year to see what kind of key themes and topics we'll be focusing on throughout 2026. And you can subscribe to our magazine there as well.